The air in the boardroom was so cold it felt like a physical weight on my skin. It was the kind of cold that had nothing to do with the thermostat and everything to do with the three men in black suits who sat opposite me at the impossibly long mahogany table. The room smelled of old leather, expensive cologne, and something else, a low-humming current of barely restrained violence. I shouldn't have been there. A summons from a prestigious downtown law firm was an anomaly in my world, a world that consisted of lukewarm coffee, worn-out scrubs, and the quiet, antiseptic halls of the Willow Creek Hospice. My life was a sequence of soft goodbyes, of holding hands with strangers as they slipped from this world into the next. It was not a life that involved mahogany boardrooms and men whose stillness was more terrifying than any overt threat. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies with a kind, weary face, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. He had been the one to call me, his voice apologetic and vague, insisting my presence was required for the reading of the last will and testament of a former client. Antonio Rossi. I remembered him. A quiet old man with eyes that had seen too much. He rarely spoke and his family never visited. I'd read to him sometimes from old poetry books just to fill the silence. I'd made sure his pillows were fluffed, that he had an extra blanket when the night chill crept in. Simple things, acts of basic human decency that were part of my job. I never expected to be remembered for them. Mr. Davies adjusted his spectacles, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the document. He avoided looking at the man seated directly in the center of the trio opposite me. This man was the source of the room's chilling temperature. He was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, all sharp angles, dark intensity, and the promise of destruction. His suit was impeccably tailored, his dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were pale Arctic gray, and they had been fixed on me since the moment I walked in, stripping me down layer by layer, searching for a weakness, a lie, a motive. He hadn't said a word, but his presence screamed. It screamed of power, of danger, of a world so far removed from my own that I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. The two men flanking him were shadows, copies made of lesser material but still imbued with the same lethal stillness. Mr. Davies began to read, his voice a dry monotone reciting a litany of legal jargon, minor bequests to distant relatives, donations to charities. I barely listened, my focus entirely on the man across from me, on the primal instinct screaming at me to run. Why was I here? What did any of this have to do with me? The man's jaw was tight, a muscle flexing rhythmically. He was waiting for the main event, the part that mattered. And I had the terrifying premonition that it somehow involved me. And now, Mr. Davies said, pausing to take a sip of water, we come to the primary beneficiary and the disposition of the remainder of the estate, including all personal properties, business holdings, and liquid assets. He took a deep, shaky breath and his eyes, full of apology, finally met mine. My heart began to pound a frantic, sick rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The reason for the summons, the reason for the tension, the reason for the terrifying man's piercing stare. Mr. Davies read the next line and the world tilted on its axis. Lawyer read the will, I leave everything to the woman who showed me kindness. The silence that followed was a living thing, a predator. It was a silence so absolute that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I stared at Mr. Davies, my mind refusing to process the words. Everything, it was impossible, a mistake, some cruel, elaborate joke. Then the silence was shattered. The man in the center leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the polished table. The movement was slow, controlled, but it held the deadly promise of a cobra striking. His Arctic eyes were no longer just assessing me, they were burning into me, pinning me to my chair. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the wood of the table and up into my bones. It was the sound of controlled fury of a king who had just been checkmated by a ghost. He didn't look at the lawyer, he looked at me. Her name, he demanded, each word a chip of ice. Give me her name. Mr. Davies swallowed hard, his gaze darting to me with undisguised pity. The will names her, he stammered, as Clara Monroe. And with the speaking of my name, I felt the cold, hard steel of a cage door slamming shut around me. Clara Monroe, my name hung in the air, an indictment. The man, the Mafia boss my mind supplied, filling in the terrifying blanks, didn't react. No flicker of surprise, no outburst of anger, just a deepening of the chilling stillness, a compression of the power he radiated until it was a dense, inescapable gravity. He was Dante Rossi, Antonio's grandson. I knew this not because anyone had said it, but because it was an undeniable fact, like the sun rising in the east. He had the same strong jaw, the same proud set to his shoulders. But where Antonio's eyes had been pools of weary shadow, Dante's were shards of ice. He was the heir apparent, the one who was supposed to inherit the kingdom. And the old king, with his last dying breath, had given it all to me, the hospice nurse, the girl who read him poetry. My world was small and meticulously ordered. An apartment the size of a shoebox, filled with secondhand books in the scent of lavender. A job that was more a calling than a career, draining me emotionally but filling a void inside me that had been carved out when I lost my own parents too young. I was a professional caretaker, a custodian of last moments. My life was quiet. It was solitary. It was safe. Now the safety I had so carefully constructed was shattering like glass. "This is a mistake," I whispered, the words getting lost in the cavernous room. I looked at Mr. Davies, pleading with my eyes. Mr. Rossi Antonio, he was confused. He wasn't in his right mind. His attending physician signed a certificate of sound mind and memory just one day before this will was executed. Mr. Davies said, his voice flat, apologetic. He was just the messenger. This wasn't his fault. But I wanted to scream at him, to beg him to take it back, to rewind time to an hour ago when my biggest worry was whether I'd remembered to water my plants. Dante Rossi pushed his chair back, the sound of violent screech against the polished floor. He stood, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to suck the air from the room. He was tall, broader than I'd realized, the bespoke suit doing little to hide the raw, coiled power of the body beneath. He walked around the table, his movements fluid and predatory. He didn't stop until he was standing behind my chair. I froze, my back ramrod straight. I could feel his heat, smell his clean, masculine scent, something crisp and cold like winter air. My heart was a trapped bird beating its wings frantically against the cage of my ribs. He placed his hands on the back of my chair, his fingers gripping the leather just inches from my shoulders. It wasn't a touch, but it felt like one. A brand. A claim. "Clara Monroe," he said, my name a soft, dangerous caress in my ear. "Tell me, Clara, what kind of kindness did you show my grandfather?" The question was loaded, dripping with insinuation. He thought I was a con artist, a grifter who had preyed on a dying old man. The injustice of it burned, cutting through the fear. I found a sliver of my voice. "I was his nurse," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "I did my job. I treated him with dignity, that's all." "Dignity?" He repeated the word, tasting it, dissecting it. "My grandfather commanded armies of men. He built an empire from nothing. He didn't need a nurse to give him dignity." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant only for me. "So tell me what you really did. Did you whisper promises in his ear? Did you offer him a different kind of comfort in the dead of night?" Accusation was so vile, so far from the quiet, professional relationship I'd had with Antonio, that it shocked me out of my fear. A hot, righteous anger surged through me. I twisted in my chair to face him, my head tilted back to meet his icy gaze. "Your grandfather was a lonely old man whose family abandoned him in his final days," I shot back, my voice shaking with fury. "I read to him. I talked to him. I held his hand when he was scared. It's a kindness you clearly wouldn't understand." For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold fury crossed his face. Surprise. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He had expected a timid, weeping girl, easily intimidated. He had underestimated me. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Brave," he murmured, "and foolish." He straightened up, turning his attention back to the room at large. "The will is a farce. My grandfather was manipulated. We will contest it." "You are free to do so, Mr. Rossi," Mr. Davies said, finding a bit of his professional spine. "But the will is ironclad." Antonio was very specific. "Any party who contests it is automatically disinherited from even the minor bequests mentioned." He wanted a smooth transition. A smooth transition. To me, the old man hadn't just been kind, he'd been cunning. He had anticipated his grandson's reaction. He had protected me in a way. But he had also painted a giant target on my back. Dante's gaze swung back to me, the brief flash of amusement gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. He saw it too, the trap. He couldn't fight the will without losing everything, which meant he had to control the one person who had it all, me. "The meeting is over," Dante announced, his authority absolute. He looked at his two men. "Wait for me in the car." They rose in unison and left without a word, leaving me alone with him and the lawyer. Dante then turned to Mr. Davies. "Leave us." It wasn't a request. Mr. Davies gathered his papers, gave me one last look of profound pity, and scurried from the room, closing the heavy doors behind him. We were alone. The predator and his unexpected prey. He pulled a chair out and sat down, not across the table, but right next to me, our knees almost touching. The proximity was overwhelming. "So, Clara Monroe," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "it seems you and I are now partners." "We are not partners," I said, my voice tight. I tried to inject steel into the words, but they came out brittle, fragile. "This is a mistake. I don't want any of this." "And yet you have it," he replied, his voice a low, smooth rumble that did nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. "All of it, my father's house, his cars, his art, his businesses, my life, you own it all now on paper." He gestured around the opulent boardroom. This building, it's yours, the chair you're sitting in. Yours too. The absurdity of it was crushing. Me, Clara Monroe, who bought her clothes from thrift stores and considered a night out to be a movie rental and a pint of ice cream. The owner of an empire built on shadows and blood. I felt a wave of dizziness, my vision swimming. I gripped the arms of my new chair, the cool leather a strange anchor in a world that had come unmoored. I'll sign it over to you, I said, the words coming out in a desperate rush. Right now, I don't want it, tell me what to sign. A dark, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. It's not that simple, Clara. Why not? I demanded. It's mine, right? I can do what I want with it, and I want to give it back. My grandfather was a cunning old bastard, Dante said, a note of grudging respect in his tone. He loved games, puzzles, and this is his last one. The estate is yours, but it's tied up in a trust. You are the sole beneficiary and the sole trustee. You can't just sign it away, you have to manage it for a period of no less than 5 years, after which you are free to dissolve the trust and do with the assets as you please. 5 years. The words fell like stones into the pit of my stomach. He wanted to trap me. Antonio hadn't just given me his fortune, he had given me his life, his grandson's life. He had shackled me to this man, to this world, for 5 years. Why? What could a dying old man possibly want from me that would require such a cruel, intricate posthumous scheme? Why? I whispered, looking at Dante, searching his impenetrable face for an answer. Why would he do this? He wanted to teach me a lesson, Dante said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He thought I was becoming too much like him, too cold, too focused on the business. He thought I'd forgotten the heart of the family. His gaze flickered over me, a quick, dismissive assessment. He thought you were the heart, me, a stranger. It made no sense. So what does this mean? I asked, my mind reeling. What do you want from me? What do I want? He leaned in closer, the space between us shrinking until it was almost non-existent. His clean, cold scent filled my senses, making it hard to think. I want my life back, Clara, and until those 5 years are up, you are the key, which means you are now my primary business interest. The way he said business interest sent a shiver of dread down my spine. I wasn't a person to him, I was a problem to be managed, an asset to be controlled. You will come with me now, he said, standing up. It wasn't a question. No, I said, a spark of defiance flaring. I'm going home to my apartment. He looked down at me, a flicker of something that might have been pity in his arctic eyes. Your little apartment in that walk-up with the faulty front door lock, you can't go back there. Why not? Because as of an hour ago, when that will was read, you became the most powerful woman in the city's underworld, and the most vulnerable. Every rival my family has now knows that the Rossi Empire is in the hands of a hospice nurse. They will see you as a weakness, an opportunity. They will come for you, to control you, to ransom you, or to kill you and send the organization into chaos. Your old life is over. His words were calm, logical, and more terrifying than any threat. He was right. Antonio, in his misguided attempt to teach his grandson a lesson, hadn't just given me a fortune. He had put a bounty on my head. I was a lamb dropped into a lion's den, and the only thing standing between me and the other predators was the biggest, most dangerous lion of all. I looked at him, truly looked at him. At the hard lines of his face, the lethal grace of his posture. He was a monster, a killer. The kind of man I read about in lurid crime novels, not the kind of man I expected to be my self-appointed guardian. But he was also the only person in this entire mess who understood the danger I was in. My survival was linked to his. Where will I go? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The fight had drained out of me, replaced by a cold, numbing fear. You'll come with me, he said again, his tone softer this time but no less final. He held out his hand. It was a large hand with long, elegant fingers and clean, trimmed nails. A hand that could probably sign death warrants and caress a lover with equal, terrifying skill. Taking it would be a surrender. A step into his world, a world of darkness and violence from which I might never return. But not taking it, that was a death sentence. With a trembling hand, I placed my fingers in his. His grip was warm and firm, swallowing my hand completely. A current, a jolt of awareness shot up my arm. It was the feeling of a pact being sealed. He pulled me to my feet. Welcome to the family, Clara Monroe, he said, his voice a low, dark promise. The ride from the lawyer's office was a silent, surreal blur. I was seated in the back of a black SUV with windows so tinted they turned the bright afternoon into a permanent twilight. The leather seats were cool against my skin, the air inside the car unnaturally still and quiet, sealing us off from the noise and chaos of the city. Dante sat beside me, not touching, but his presence was a palpable force, a weight that pressed in on me. He hadn't spoken a word since he led me from the boardroom. He was on his phone, his thumb moving with silent, efficient speed across the screen. He wasn't texting. He was giving orders, moving chess pieces on a board I couldn't see. My mind was a maelstrom of panic and disbelief. I kept replaying the scene in the boardroom, Mr. Davies' voice, the cold fury in Dante's eyes. It felt like a movie, like something happening to someone else. But the solid warmth of his hand, which I could still feel phantom-like around my own, was a stark reminder of the reality of my situation. I had been kidnapped. Not in the traditional sense with a bag over my head and a gun to my back, but kidnapped all the same. I had walked into that law office a free woman and was now the property, the primary business interest, of the most dangerous man I had ever met. We drove for what felt like an eternity, leaving the dense grid of downtown and heading for the hills that overlooked the city, where the houses grew larger and the streets became quieter and more secluded. We passed through a set of imposing wrought iron gates, manned by guards who looked as severe and well-dressed as the men who had been in the boardroom. They nodded at Dante as we swept past, their eyes lingering on me for a fraction of a second too long. I was the new curiosity, the unknown quantity. The fortress, for it could be called nothing less than a fortress, was a stunning piece of modern architecture, all glass and dark gray stone, built into the side of the hill. It was stark, beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a perfect reflection of the man who lived within it. The car pulled into a subterranean garage and the door slid silently shut behind us, sealing us in. The engine cut out and the ensuing silence was heavy, absolute. "My men will retrieve your things from your apartment," Dante said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was flat, matter of fact. He turned to look at me, his arctic eyes unreadable in the dim light. "They will be discreet, no one will know you've left." "My things," I said, my voice small. "My books, my clothes." It was so pathetic to be worried about my worn paperbacks and second-hand sweaters when I had just inherited an empire. But they were mine. Last vestiges of a life that was being systematically erased. "Everything," he confirmed, "including the cat." I stared at him. "How did you know I have a cat?" "I know everything about you, Clara," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I've had a team looking into you since my grandfather's health started to decline. I know you work the night shift. I know you volunteer at the animal shelter on your days off. I know you prefer tea to coffee and that you've read every Jane Austen novel at least 3 times. I know you are 26 years old, an orphan with no family to speak of." The sheer volume of information he had on me was staggering and violating. He had been watching me. Long before I ever knew he existed, I had been a file on his desk, a person of interest. The thought made my skin crawl. "Why?" I whispered. "Why were you investigating me?" "Because my grandfather started talking about you," he said, a flicker of something annoyance, resentment, in his voice. "He mentioned a kind nurse, an angel. In his world, angels are rarely what they seem. I assumed you were a threat, a gold digger playing the long game." The irony was bitter. He had been so wrong and yet so right. I wasn't a threat, but I had ended up with everything anyway. He got out of the car and opened my door. I remained seated, a wave of paralysis washing over me. This was it, the point of no return. The moment I stepped out of this car and into his house, my old life was officially over. "Come," he said, not a request, a soft, steel-edged command. I took a shaky breath and slid out of the car. He led me through a door and into an elevator that rose silently through the house, opening directly into a vast, open-plan living space. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city glittering below. The furniture was minimalist and severe, the color palette a stark monochrome of black, white, and gray. It was less a home and more a gallery, a beautiful, empty, cold space. "This is your home now," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. He led me up a floating glass staircase to a long, white hallway. He stopped at a door and pushed it open. "This will be your room." It was, of course, beautiful, a massive bed with a simple gray duvet, another wall of glass with the same stunning view, an ensuite bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. It was also completely impersonal. "There are clothes in the closet," he said. "They should fit. You can tell my housekeeper, Alina, if you need anything else." He turned to leave. "Wait," I said, finding my voice. "You can't just lock me in here. This is insane." He turned back, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. The pose was casual, but the coiled tension was still there. "You are not a prisoner, Clara," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You are a guest, a very, very valuable guest, and valuable things need to be protected." "Protected?" I scoffed, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my throat. "Or controlled?" A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. "Is there a difference?" He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled the door closed, the latch clicking shut with a soft, final sound. I was alone, a guest in a gilded cage. I walked over to the wall of glass and looked down at the city. My city. It looked like a million scattered diamonds, beautiful and distant. Somewhere down there was my little apartment, my quiet life. It felt a world away. It felt like a lifetime ago. A single tear traced a hot path down my cheek. I wasn't just a guest. I was a ghost, haunting a life that was no longer my own in a house that belonged to a monster. And the monster's name was Dante Rossi. I spent the first 24 hours in a state of suspended animation. I explored my luxurious prison cell, running my hands over the cool marble of the bathroom counter, the soft cashmere of the sweaters hanging, tags still on in the walk-in closet. It was a complete wardrobe curated for a stranger. For me, the thought was deeply unsettling. Someone had gone shopping for a ghost, guessing at her sizes, her tastes. They had guessed well. The styles were simple, elegant, and muted: creams, grays, blacks. The clothes of someone who didn't want to be noticed. It was a perfect uniform for my new role as the invisible owner of everything. A woman named Alina with kind eyes and a sad, knowing smile brought my meals on a tray. She was the housekeeper Dante had mentioned. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her presence a brief, welcome pocket of warmth in the cold, sterile house. She didn't ask questions. She just refilled my water glass, fluffed my pillows, and looked at me with a pity that made me feel like a fragile, exotic bird someone had trapped in a cage. On the second day, my things arrived. Not delivered by a moving truck, but carried in by two of Dante's silent, dark-suited men. They deposited my worn cardboard boxes and my beat-up suitcase in the middle of the opulent room, where they looked laughably out of place. And then, one of the men brought in a cat carrier. He opened the door, and my ginger cat Marmalade stalked out, surveyed his new palatial surroundings with a disdainful flick of his tail, and immediately hopped onto the king-sized bed as if he owned the place. I scooped him up, burying my face in his familiar, comforting fur. The scent of my own apartment of home clung to him. It was the first real thing I had felt in 2 days, and I burst into tears, my sobs quiet and desperate, into his soft coat. Dante remained a ghost. I didn't see him, but I felt his presence. I heard the low murmur of his voice from his office down the hall. I heard the powerful engine of his car coming and going from the garage below. He was a phantom limb, an unseen force controlling my new reality. He was giving me space, letting me acclimate, letting the reality and the helplessness of my situation sink in. On the third morning, I woke up with a new resolve. The fear and the shock were still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but they were now overlaid with a layer of stubborn anger. Antonio Rossi had done this to me. He had thrown me into the lion's den for what? To prove a point to his grandson. I wouldn't be a passive victim in their twisted family drama. I was a hospice nurse. I dealt with life and death and grieving families every day. I was stronger than they thought. After showering, I put on a pair of black trousers and a simple cream silk blouse from the ghost's closet. I put my hair up in its usual neat bun. I looked professional. I looked in control, even if I felt like I was splintering apart inside. I walked out of my room and down the hall to the door I knew was his office. I didn't knock. I just opened it and walked in. He was seated behind a massive desk of dark wood and steel, a bank of monitors glowing behind him, displaying stock tickers and security camera feeds. He was on the phone, but he looked up as I entered, one dark eyebrow raising in surprise. He didn't seem angry at the intrusion, more intrigued. He held up a finger, a silent command to wait, and finished his call with a few clipped, authoritative words in Italian. Then he hung up and swiveled his chair to face me, steepling his long fingers under his chin. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, amused drawl. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I want to see it," I said, my voice steady. "I want to see the business." He tilted his head, his arctic eyes studying me. "The business? You said I own it," I stated, crossing my arms over my chest. "All of it, so I want to see it. I want to understand what it is I supposedly own." I expected him to refuse, to laugh at me, to tell me to go back to my room and play with my cat. But he didn't. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was the same smile from the boardroom, the one that didn't reach his eyes. "An excellent idea," he said, standing up. "Every queen should survey her kingdom." He led me down to the subterranean garage. It wasn't just a place to park cars. It was a command center. A map of the city was displayed on a massive screen dotted with blinking lights. Men and women in sharp suits sat at computer terminals, their faces illuminated by the glow of the data streaming across their screens. It looked like something out of a spy movie. "This is logistics," Dante explained, his voice low as we stood on a raised platform overlooking the floor. "Shipping. Distribution are legitimate businesses. We import olive oil from Italy, textiles, wine. It's the public face of the Rossi Empire." It was impressive, and clean, too clean. This wasn't the whole story. This was the part he was willing to show me. "And the illegitimate businesses?" I asked, turning to face him. His smile widened. He appreciated my directness. "Those," he said, "are a bit more complicated." He led me to another part of the house, to a room I hadn't seen. The library. It was filled with old, leather-bound books, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and whiskey. He walked over to a section of the bookshelf and pulled a thick volume of Dante's Inferno. The entire bookshelf swung inward, revealing a hidden door. My heart skipped a beat. It was so cliché, so theatrical, but also terrifyingly real. The room behind the bookshelf was his true office. No windows, soundproofed walls. A single chair faced a large, empty desk. On the desk was a laptop, a burner phone, and a single, wickedly sharp-looking letter opener. This was the heart of the Shadow Empire. Most of my grandfather's business and mine is not about tangible things, he said, his voice dropping, taking on a harder edge. It's about information, power, influence. We own politicians. We control unions. We know who is cheating on their wives, who is skimming from their companies. We trade in secrets. Secrets are more valuable than any commodity. He picked up the letter opener, testing its sharp point against his thumb. And when secrets aren't enough, we trade in violence. He looked up at me, his eyes daring me to flinch, to run. This is the kingdom you inherited, Clara, a kingdom built on whispers and blood. Do you still want to see it? I met his gaze, my chin held high, refusing to show the fear that was churning in my stomach. Yes, I said, my voice unwavering. Show me everything. His expression shifted, the amusement replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Respect, perhaps, or was it just surprise that the little nurse hadn't run screaming for the hills? He took me at my word. For the next several days, Dante Rossi became my personal tutor in the art of running a criminal empire. It was a surreal, horrifying, and utterly fascinating education. He showed me the ledgers, the real ones, encrypted on a laptop in his secret office. They detailed transactions that had nothing to do with olive oil and everything to do with extortion, money laundering, and protection services. He explained the complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts that made the Rossi money impossible to trace. He spoke of it all with a detached, clinical precision, as if he were a professor lecturing on macroeconomic theory. There was no apology in his voice, no glee, just the pragmatic reality of his world. It's a business, he said one afternoon as we sat in the soundproofed library. Like any other, it provides a service. We offer order in a world of chaos. People pay for that order. You mean they pay you so you don't create chaos for them? I countered, looking up from a spreadsheet that detailed payoffs to a city councilman. He had the grace to almost smile. Semantics, he murmured. Sometimes the threat of chaos is all that's needed. He introduced me to the concept of loyalty, Rossi style. He showed me security footage of a rival family's enforcer being dealt with after trying to move in on their territory. The violence was brutal, swift, and stomach-churning. He didn't force me to watch, but he didn't hide it either. This is the reality, Clara, he said, his voice cold. Weakness is a death sentence. You must be willing to do whatever it takes to protect what is yours. What is mine? The words echoed in my head. Was any of this mine, this empire of fear? I felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up in a queen's robes with a hangman's noose for a necklace. The most disturbing part was how quickly I began to adapt. The initial shock gave way to a numb, intellectual curiosity. I started asking questions, smart questions. I pointed out inefficiencies in a money laundering scheme, suggesting a more direct route through a different set of charities. I noticed a pattern in a rival's movements that suggested a new smuggling route. I was good at it. My brain, used to tracking medical charts and patient histories, saw patterns. It saw the logic in the chaos. Dante noticed. I could see it in the way he looked at me. The initial condescension was gone, replaced by a grudging admiration. Our sessions became less like lectures and more like strategy meetings. We would sit across from each other, the air thick with tension, debating the merits of a particular course of action. The power dynamic began to shift. I wasn't just his prisoner anymore. I was his student, his apprentice, and in some terrifying, unspoken way, his equal. The proximity, the intensity of our forced partnership was creating a dangerous intimacy. I learned the tells of his moods, the slight twitch in his jaw when he was angry, the way his eyes would darken just before he delivered a particularly harsh truth. I learned the cadence of his voice, the rare moments his guard would slip and a hint of the man, not the boss, would shine through. I saw the weariness in his eyes late at night, the immense pressure of the crown he wore, and he in turn was seeing me. Not just the timid nurse, but the woman with a sharp, analytical mind who refused to be broken. One evening we were in the library going over personnel files. He was vetting a new recruit and he asked for my opinion. His file is perfect, I said, looking at the man's picture. Too perfect, no debts, no vices, a spotless record. People like that don't join organizations like this unless they have a hidden agenda. Dante looked at me, his expression unreadable. You don't trust anyone, do you, Clara? I'm learning from the best, I retorted. The corner of his mouth twitched. What does your gut tell you? He asked, his voice low. My gut tells me he's a cop, I said without hesitation. Or working for a rival, he's a plant. Dante stared at me for a long moment, then picked up his phone and made a call. Dig deeper into the new recruit, he said into the phone. I want to know who his mother's second cousin is. I want to know if he ever cheated on a test in the 3rd grade. Tear his life apart. He hung up and looked at me. We'll see if your gut is right. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The lines were blurring. I was starting to think like him. I was starting to see the world through his cold, pragmatic eyes. Was I becoming a monster too? I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The house was dark and silent. As I passed the main living area, I saw a figure standing in front of the massive glass wall staring out at the city. It was Dante. He was just a silhouette against the glittering backdrop of lights, a glass of what looked like whiskey in his hand. He was so still, so alone. My heart gave a strange, painful lurch. He was the most powerful man I knew, surrounded by guards and loyal men, yet he seemed like the loneliest person on earth. I should have turned back, gone to my room. But I found myself walking toward him. He heard me, his head turning slightly. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Couldn't sleep. He asked, his voice rough. Too busy learning how to be a crime lord, I said, my attempt at a joke falling flat. I stood beside him a few feet away, following his gaze out to the city. You were right, by the way, he said, not looking at me. About the recruit, he's a federal agent, undercover. A cold thrill, equal parts fear and vindication, went through me. I had been right, I had saved him in a way. You have good instincts, Clara, he said, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were dark in the dim light, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze. My grandfather saw it. He knew you were more than just a kind nurse. What am I then? I whispered. He took a step closer, the space between us shrinking, the air crackled. You, he said, his voice a low, dangerous murmur, are a queen without a crown, and I'm beginning to think my grandfather wasn't as crazy as I thought. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was electric, a searing jolt that shot straight to my core. Tell me to stop, he whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips. My breath hitched, my heart was pounding. I should have told him to stop, I should have run. But I didn't, I couldn't. I was caught in his gravity and I didn't want to break free. His fingers traced the line of my jaw, a touch so gentle it was a stark, shocking contrast to the violence I knew he was capable of. It was the touch of a man holding something fragile, something precious. My entire body hummed with a tension that was no longer just fear. It was anticipation. A terrifying, thrilling desire that had been building in the long hours we'd spent together, in the charged silences and the verbal sparring. He had become the center of my universe, the sun my small, captured planet orbited, and I was falling into him, pulled by a force I couldn't fight. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. My eyes fluttered shut and I waited for his kiss. I waited for the consummation of this strange, dangerous bond that had formed between us, but it didn't come. Instead, his hand dropped away. I opened my eyes, a sense of sharp, cold disappointment washing over me. He had taken a step back, putting a careful foot of distance between us. The air was still thick with unspoken things, but the connection was broken. His face was a mask again, the brief moment of vulnerability gone, replaced by a cold, impenetrable hardness. Go to bed, Clara, he said, his voice a harsh rasp. He turned his back on me, facing the window again, a clear dismissal. The rejection was a physical blow. Humiliation and confusion warred within me. I had offered myself to him, laid my defenses bare, and he had pushed me away. I felt foolish, naive. I had mistaken our intense proximity for intimacy, his grudging respect for affection. To him, I was still just a tool, a means to an end. Maybe this was just another lesson, a reminder of who was in control. I fled, I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked back to my room, my cheeks burning, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my body trembling. Marmalade, sensing my distress, rubbed against my legs, purring softly. I had been so stupid. I had let myself forget what he was, a monster, a manipulator. He had drawn me in, made me feel seen, made me feel special, all to ensure my compliance. The near kiss wasn't about desire, it was about power. He was testing my loyalty, seeing how far he could push me, how completely I would yield, and I had failed the test by being all too willing. The next morning, the fragile truce between us was shattered. The air was thick with a new, bitter tension. When I walked into his office, I was determined not to let him see how much he had affected me. He was all business. His voice was cold, his eyes were distant. He didn't look at me unless he had to. The tutor was gone, replaced by the remote, untouchable boss. The rejection stung more than I wanted to admit. It was a constant, dull ache. I threw myself into the work, using it as a distraction. I spent hours poring over the ledgers, learning the intricacies of his empire, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only thing that kept me from thinking about the moment his fingers had touched my skin. A week passed like this in a state of Cold War. We were colleagues locked in a strange professional relationship, the brief, intense personal connection severed. He was preparing for something, I could feel it. The energy in the house had shifted. There were more guards, more hushed, urgent phone calls. He was often gone for long stretches, returning late at night, his face etched with a new, grim tension. I knew better than to ask what was happening. He had made it clear I was no longer in his inner circle. I was on the outside again, looking in. One afternoon, I was in the library, the official one, looking for something to read, a temporary escape. I ran my fingers along the spines of the leather-bound books, the scent of old paper a small comfort. My hand stopped on a slim volume of poetry by Christina Rossetti. It was one of the books I had read to Antonio. A wave of sadness and anger washed over me. This was all his fault. His strange, sentimental, and ultimately cruel final wish. I pulled the book from the shelf. As I did, a small, folded piece of paper fell out from between its pages and fluttered to the floor. My brow furrowed. I bent down and picked it up. It was a single sheet of elegant cream-colored stationery, the kind a man like Antonio would use. It was folded neatly in half. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a letter. In a shaky but clear hand, Antonio had written a message. "My dearest Clara," it began. My breath caught in my throat. "This was for me. If you are reading this, it means my foolish, stubborn grandson has not yet scared you away. For that I am grateful. I know you must be angry and confused, and for that I am deeply sorry. I did not do this to punish you, but to save him. Dante is a good man, Clara. He has a good heart, the heart of his mother, but he has buried it deep beneath the ice of his father's world. He believes love is a weakness, that kindness is a liability. He is turning into a ghost, just as I did. I saw the way you looked at him in the photos from the investigation files. Not with fear, but with compassion. I saw the way he looked at them, too. He was intrigued by you, the girl who spent her days with the dying, the girl who was unafraid of endings. I am not leaving you my fortune, my dear. I am leaving you my son, my legacy. I am giving you the power to force him to see that there is more to this life than shadows and blood. I am giving you a chance to save his soul. It is a terrible burden to place on you, I know, but I saw the strength in you, the quiet, unshakable strength of a truly kind person. He will fight you. He will push you away. He will try to hate you. Do not let him. Show him the heart he has forgotten. That is my last wish." Tears streamed down my face as I read the old man's words. It wasn't a game. It wasn't a lesson. It was a desperate plea from a dying man to save his grandson from himself. He hadn't seen me as a tool. He had seen me as a salvation. And Dante, he had pushed me away not to control me, but because he was afraid. He was afraid of the very thing his grandfather had seen in me. The kindness, the heart, the part of him he had tried so hard to kill. A new, fierce resolve hardened within me. This wasn't about his empire anymore. It wasn't about the money or the power. It was about the man, the lonely, broken man who stood in the dark and stared at the city lights. Antonio had left me a legacy. He had left me Dante, and I would not fail him. Armed with Antonio's letter, the world shifted on its axis once more. Dante's rejection, which had felt like a cold, calculated move to assert power, was recast in a new, more tragic light. It wasn't a display of strength, it was an act of profound fear. He was terrified of the very thing I represented: emotion, connection, a life outside the brutal calculus of his business. He was pushing me away to protect himself, not from me, but from the parts of himself he had long since buried. He was trying to save himself from the hope I represented. The dynamic between us was a complex, heartbreaking dance, and I had been misreading all the steps. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. It was a secret I would keep, a hidden compass to navigate the treacherous terrain of Dante Rossi's heart. My strategy had to change. I could no longer meet his coldness with my own. I couldn't retreat. Antonio's last wish had been a call to arms, and I would not be a coward. I had to push back, not with anger, but with the one thing he was most afraid of: unwavering kindness. I started small. I began joining him in the evenings when he stood by the window, a silent presence offering no demands, just a shared space. At first, he would ignore me, his shoulders rigid. But I would stay, nursing a cup of tea, until the silence between us became less of a battle and more of a shared quiet. I had Alina show me how to use the complicated espresso machine and started leaving a perfectly made macchiato on his desk in his secret office every morning before he arrived. He never acknowledged it, but I knew he drank it. I saw the empty cup in the sink later. I started leaving books for him, ones I thought he might like, on the table in the library. Not business texts, but novels about honor and loss, history books about fallen empires. Small offerings, tiny seeds of normalcy planted in the barren soil of his life. He was still preparing for his war. The tension in the house was a constant, thrumming hum. I knew something was coming, a confrontation with a rival, a man named Petrov, whose name I heard Dante spit like a curse on the phone. This Petrov was making a move, emboldened by the rumors of the Rossi family's strange new power structure. He was testing the waters, and Dante was preparing to show him just how deep and cold those waters were. One evening I found Dante in his hidden office, a map of the city's docklands spread across his desk. He was marking routes, ambush points. His face was grim, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He was a general on the eve of battle. He looked up as I entered, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "What is it, Clara?" I was holding a small, framed drawing. It was a charcoal sketch I had done of Marmalade sleeping in a patch of sun on my bed. It was simple, a moment of peace. "I thought this room could use something," I said softly, "that wasn't about death." I placed it on the corner of his desk, a tiny island of warmth in a sea of cold, hard strategy. He stared at it, his expression unreadable. For a moment I thought he would sweep it off the desk, that I had overstepped, that this was a sanctum I had no right to soften. He looked from the drawing to me, and his eyes, the ice in them, seemed to thin just for a second. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice a low, rough whisper. "Doing what?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely around him at me. "The coffee, the books, the kindness. What's your angle, Clara? What do you want?" "I want you to be careful," I said, my voice barely audible. "Whatever it is you're planning, I want you to come back." The admission hung in the air between us. It was the first time I had voiced my fear for him. It was a crack in my own armor, a confession of my own burgeoning feelings. He stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing in front of me. He was so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "Caring about whether I come back is a liability," he said, his voice a low growl. "It's a weakness. Petrov will use it against me if he finds out about you." "Then make sure he doesn't," I retorted, holding his gaze. "You're the one who told me weakness is a death sentence. Don't let me be yours." His eyes searched mine, a silent, furious battle raging within them. He was fighting himself, fighting the pull toward me. "You are playing a very dangerous game," he murmured. "I know," I said. "You taught me how." The night of the planned confrontation with Petrov arrived. The house was electric with a deadly, silent energy. Dante was dressed in black, the color of a wraith. He was checking a sleek black handgun, the movements economical and terrifyingly practiced. He was about to walk out the door, surrounded by his men, when I stepped in front of him. His men froze. Dante's eyes narrowed. "Clara, get out of the way." "I have something for you," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I held out my hand. In my palm was a small, smooth, gray stone from one of the planters on the patio. It was nothing, a piece of rock. He stared at it, then at me, his expression baffled. "My mother used to give me a worry stone when I was scared," I explained, my voice a whisper. "She said I could put all my worries into it and it would hold them for me so I didn't have to. It's stupid, I know, but—" My voice trailed off. It was a foolish, sentimental gesture. A girl's magic in a world of bullets and blood. He would laugh at me. He looked at my outstretched hand, at the simple stone, then his gaze lifted to mine. The hardness in his eyes softened, just for a moment, revealing the weary man beneath the armor. Slowly he reached out and took the stone from my palm, his fingers closing around it. He didn't say anything. He just held it, his large hand completely dwarfing the small rock. He tucked it into his pocket. Then he looked at me, a long, searching look that conveyed more than any words could. It was an acknowledgement, a thank you, a promise. "Lock the doors behind me," he said, his voice rough. "Don't open them for anyone." And then he was gone, sweeping out into the night with his army of shadows, leaving me alone in the silent, cavernous house, my heart pounding with a terror that was no longer just for myself, but for him. I had given him a piece of my heart in the shape of a stone, and I could only pray he would bring it back. The hours after he left were a special kind of hell. The house was a tomb, the silence a roaring in my ears. I did as he said, checking the locks on the doors, my hands trembling. Elena had retired to her quarters, her face a pale mask of practiced resignation. She had lived through countless nights like this. For me, it was the first, and it was tearing me apart. I couldn't sit still. I paced the length of the glass wall in the living room, my arms wrapped around myself, my gaze fixed on the distant, glittering lights of the city below. He was down there somewhere, in the dark underbelly of the world, walking into a confrontation that could end his life. The image of him checking his gun, the cold efficiency of his movements, was burned into my mind. That was his reality, and I had willingly tied my fate to it. I had fallen for a man who spoke the language of violence as fluently as I spoke the language of comfort. My mind was a torrent of what-ifs. What if Petrov had more men? What if it was a trap? What if Dante's own men betrayed him? He was a king surrounded by sharks, and tonight he was swimming in bloody water. The little gray stone I'd given him felt like such a pathetically inadequate shield against the dangers he was facing. It was a child's charm against a world of monsters. I found myself in his library, the official one. I needed to be surrounded by his things, by his scent, which lingered faintly on the leather chairs. I ran my fingers over the books, the tangible history of his family. I saw the volume of Rossetti poetry, and my heart ached. Show him the heart he has forgotten. Was I doing that? Or was I just a fool falling for a man who was incapable of being saved? Suddenly, a sound from downstairs shattered the silence. A loud, metallic bang from the direction of the kitchen. My blood ran cold. Dante had taken all his men with him. The house was supposed to be empty, save for me and Elena. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. I crept out of the library and to the top of the floating staircase, my heart hammering against my ribs. I peered down into the darkness of the main floor. Nothing, silence. Had I imagined it, then I heard it again. A soft scrape. A footstep. Someone was inside the house. They hadn't come through the front door. They must have found another way in, a service entrance. A window, Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I thought of Dante's words, "Don't open the door for anyone." He had known this was a possibility. While he was out fighting one enemy, another could be making a move on his queen. On me. My first instinct was to run back to my room to lock the door to hide. But my room didn't lock from the inside. Dante had made sure of that. There was nowhere to hide. My mind raced. The secret office, the library, the bookshelf door, it was soundproofed. Windowless, a vault. If I could get there, I could lock myself in. I turned and ran, not toward the stairs, but down the long upstairs hallway, my bare feet making no sound on the polished floors. I had to get to the library before they found me. I could hear them now, more than one person, their footsteps soft but hurried on the marble floor below. They were searching for me. I reached the library and slipped inside, pulling the heavy doors closed as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I ran to the bookshelf, my eyes scanning the spines. Dante's Inferno. I grabbed the book and pulled. The mechanism clicked, and the bookshelf swung inward with a low groan. I slipped through the opening and fumbled for the lock on the inside, a heavy deadbolt I had seen Dante use. I slammed it home just as I heard the library doors burst open. I pressed my back against the bookshelf, my breath coming in ragged, silent gasps. I could hear their muffled voices from the other side. "She's not in here. Check upstairs again. The boss said she'd be here. Find her." The boss, not Dante, another boss, Petrov or someone else. I was trapped in Dante's inner sanctum, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure terror. I was in his chair behind his desk. The room was pitch black. I fumbled for the desk lamp, my fingers finally finding the switch. A small pool of warm light illuminated the desk. His laptop. The burner phone, the picture of marmalade I had drawn. My eyes scanned the room, looking for a weapon, for anything. There was nothing but the letter opener. I picked it up, its weight cold and strange in my hand. It was a pathetic defense against men with guns. I heard a new sound from outside, a frustrated banging against the bookshelf. They had found the secret door. They were trying to break it down. The heavy wood shuddered with each impact. It wouldn't hold forever. My mind went into overdrive. The phone. The burner phone, it wasn't Dante's primary phone. It was for emergencies, for untraceable calls. I snatched it up. I didn't know who to call. 911 was not an option. That would bring a different kind of army, one that would be just as dangerous for Dante. There was only one person who could help me. One person I could call. I scrolled through the recent calls. There were only two numbers. One was labeled Lorenz. The other was just a string of digits, a number he had called often. I didn't know who it was, but my gut, the same gut that had identified the undercover Fed, screamed at me to press the button. I hit call. It rang once, twice. My heart pounded with every ring. The banging on the door was getting louder, more frantic. The wood was starting to splinter. Come on," I whispered, tears of terror streaming down my face. A voice answered, sharp and impatient. "What?" It was Dante. My sob of relief was so sharp it was painful. "Dante," I breathed into the phone, my voice a choked whisper. "They're here, they're in the house." "Clara," his voice sharpened with alarm. "Where are you?" "In your office, the secret one. They're breaking down the door." I could hear shouting in the background on his end, gunfire. He was in the middle of his own war. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a low, urgent command that cut through my panic. "Stay on the phone, do not hang up, I'm coming." The line went silent for a second, then he barked orders in Italian to someone else. The banging on the door became a loud crack. A sliver of light appeared as the wood split. "Dante, they're getting in," I cried. "I know, Clara, just listen to my voice," he said, his tone impossibly calm, a lifeline in the chaos. "I'm coming for you. No one is going to hurt you. Do you hear me?" The door burst open with a crash of splintering wood. Two men stood there, silhouetted against the light from the library. They were holding guns. My scream was swallowed by my own throat. I held the phone to my ear, my only connection to Dante, as the men stepped into the room, their guns pointed directly at my heart. Well," the first man said, his voice a low, gravelly sneer. He was a bear of a man with a scarred face and small, cruel eyes. "Look what we have here, the little queen in her castle." He took a step into the room, his gaze sweeping over me, lingering on the phone I held clutched to my ear like a talisman. "Who you got there, sweetheart? The king?" He grinned, a humorless baring of teeth. "Let me talk to him." I was frozen, a statue carved from fear. I could still hear Dante's voice on the other end, a frantic, muffled stream of Italian. He knew what was happening. He could hear them. The second man, younger and leaner, snatched the phone from my hand. He put it to his own ear. "Rossi," he said into the phone, his voice smug. "We have your girl. Seems your security is a little lax." He listened for a moment, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Oh, I don't think you're in a position to make threats right now." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "We'll take good care of her." Then he ended the call and crushed the phone under his heel, severing my last link to Dante. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. Our boss is very eager to meet you, the first man said, gesturing with his gun for me to stand up. Mr. Petrov sends his regards. So I had been right, it was Petrov. He hadn't met Dante at the docks. He had sent a decoy team while his real target had always been me. Dante had walked into a trap, and so had I. My mind, which had been a blank slate of terror, began to work again. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, desperate clarity. Panicking would get me killed. Crying would get me killed. I had to think, what would Dante do? He would analyze. He would look for a weakness, an opportunity. I slowly rose to my feet, my hands held up in a gesture of surrender. I clutched the letter opener in my right hand, its sharp point hidden in my palm. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all I had. Where are we going? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. You ask a lot of questions, the second man grunted, grabbing my arm. His grip was brutal, his fingers digging into my flesh. He started to pull me out of the room. As we passed the desk, my eyes snagged on the framed drawing of Marmalade, a moment of peace, a moment of home. An idea, insane and desperate, sparked in my mind. It was a long shot, a gamble based on a hunch, on a detail I had noticed during my lessons with Dante. Wait, I said, my voice sharp. The men paused, looking at me. My drawing, I said, nodding toward the small frame. I want to take it with me. The first man laughed. You think this is a vacation? You're not taking anything. It was a gift, I said, my gaze fixed on the second man, the one holding my arm. From my husband. I loaded the word husband with as much meaning as I could. It was a lie, but in their world, relationships meant something. A wife was a possession, but one with a certain status. It might buy me a moment. The second man hesitated. He looked at the drawing, then back at me. Let her take the stupid picture, he muttered to his partner. What's the harm? The first man shrugged, impatient. Fine, grab it, let's go. The second man shoved me toward the desk. I reached for the drawing, my hand trembling. Dante had shown me the security systems. He had a silent alarm, a panic button, but I didn't know where it was. But I remembered him talking about redundancies. Layers of security. Something about pressure plates under the rug in front of the desk. And something else, something connected to his personal items. A failsafe. I picked up the frame. The back was simple cardboard held in place by small metal tabs. As my fingers closed around it, I felt it. A tiny, almost imperceptible button embedded in the corner of the cheap wooden frame. It was disguised as a flaw in the wood. My heart leaped. Was this it? A silent alarm, disguised as a sentimental object he knew no one but him would ever touch? He would never have expected me to be the one to use it. I held the frame, my thumb hovering over the butt. The men were watching me, their patience wearing thin. Come on, the first one snarled. I took a deep breath. You know, I said, my voice conversational, trying to buy another second, he's going to kill you for this. Not just because you took me, but because you were sloppy, you let me get to his office. Shut up, the second man said, reaching for me again. I pressed the button. There was no sound, no click, nothing. For a heart-stopping second, I thought I was wrong, that it was just a flaw in the wood. The man grabbed my arm again, yanking me away from the desk. Let's go, your husband can't help you now. We were halfway across the library when it happened. Not a loud alarm, but something far more terrifying. Heavy metal shutters slammed down over every window and door in the house, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The sound was a deafening series of concussive bangs, like a row of guillotines falling at once. Lockdown. The men shouted in surprise and confusion, their voices sharp with alarm. The one holding me let go, fumbling for a flashlight. The entire fortress had just turned into a sealed tomb. We were all trapped inside. And I knew with a certainty that was as terrifying as it was thrilling that Dante was on his way. I had just locked the predators in the cage with me, but the real monster was coming home, and he was coming to collect what was his. I didn't wait. In the pitch-black chaos, while the men were disoriented and shouting, I dropped to the floor and scrambled away, crawling under a large library table. The letter opener was still clutched in my hand. I could hear them, their panicked footsteps, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the darkness like frantic, searching eyes. Find her. One of them yelled. She can't have gone far, but I was gone. A ghost in the darkness of my own house. The game had changed. I wasn't just the prey anymore. I was the bait, and the trap had just been sprung. All I had to do now was survive until the hunter arrived. The darkness under the table was absolute. A thick, velvety blanket that muffled sound and erased the world. It smelled of lemon polish and old wood. I pressed myself against the thick central pedestal, making myself as small as possible, my breath held tight in my chest. The letter opener felt cold and inadequate in my sweaty palm. The beams from the men's flashlights sliced through the darkness above me, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Boots crunched on the shards of the broken door as they moved through the library, their frustrated curses echoing in the sudden tomb-like silence of the house. She's in here somewhere, the first man, the scarred one, growled. The whole place is on lockdown, she couldn't have gotten out. Maybe the alarm calls the cops, the younger one said, his voice laced with a new nervous energy. Petrov didn't say anything about a lockdown. Petrov doesn't know everything, the first one snapped. Rossi is paranoid. Now find the girl before he gets here. Before he gets here, the words sent a fresh wave of terror and a strange, savage hope through me. They knew Dante was coming. This wasn't just a kidnapping anymore, it was a siege. And I was the prize trapped in the middle. I had to stay hidden. I had to stay alive until he arrived. My mind raced, sifting through the details Dante had taught me, the schematics of the house he had shown me. The lockdown wasn't just about sealing the exits, it was tactical. It rerouted power. It limited access. It was designed to confuse and contain intruders, giving the home team the advantage. He had an advantage, I had to trust that. I could hear them moving around the room, knocking over books, pulling chairs out. Their initial confidence was gone, replaced by a tense, angry urgency. They were rats in a trap, and they were starting to realize it. The beam of a flashlight swept under the table, passing inches from my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain I had been found, but it moved on. He hadn't seen me. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the frantic searching of the two men and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I tried to control my breathing to make myself a part of the shadows. And then a new sound. A low, electronic hum from the direction of the main living room. The men heard it too, they froze. What was that? The younger one whispered. The hum was followed by a soft, metallic click. It was the elevator. My blood ran cold, then hot. It could only be operated by a key card or a biometric scan. It was Dante. He was here. He was inside the house. A savage grin I didn't recognize as my own spread across my face in the darkness. The hunter was home. The men in the library must have come to the same conclusion. I heard a frantic, whispered exchange. It's him. What do we do? Find the girl, she's our only way out of this. Their search became more desperate. They were no longer trying to be quiet. They were throwing things, overturning furniture. They were running out of time. I heard footsteps approaching my hiding place. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. A flashlight beam pinned me. Got you, the scarred man sneered, his face a grotesque mask in the upward casting light. He reached under the table and grabbed my ankle, his grip like a vice. He dragged me out, my body scraping against the floor. I kicked and struggled, but he was too strong. He hauled me to my feet, twisting my arm behind my back and pressing the cold barrel of his gun to my temple. The younger man stood by, his own gun trained on the library doors. All right, Rossi. The scarred man yelled, his voice booming in the enclosed space. I've got your queen. You want her back in one piece, you show yourself, and you let us walk out of here. Silence. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he wasn't there, that I had imagined it. Then a voice came from the darkness beyond the library doors, a voice that was preternaturally calm, cold, and dripping with lethal promise. That's not going to happen, Dante said, but I'll give you a choice. Let her go now and I'll make it quick, you have my word. The man holding me laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. You're not in a position to be giving orders, Rossi, am I not? Dante's voice was closer now, just outside the doorway. You're in my house, you're breathing my air, and you're touching what's mine. You are already dead. We're just negotiating the terms of your departure. The sheer arrogant confidence in his voice was terrifying and exhilarating. He wasn't afraid, he was in control. This was his world, his killing ground. The scarred man holding me was starting to sweat. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He had thought the girl was leverage. He was just now realizing that the girl was a trigger. I'll kill her, he screamed, his voice cracking. He pressed the gun harder against my temple. One more step and I'll splatter her brains all over your precious books. Go ahead, Dante's voice was like ice. But know this, if even one hair on her head is harmed, quick will not be an option. I will take you apart piece by piece. I will find everyone you have ever loved and I will do the same to them. I will erase your entire existence from this earth. The threat was so absolute, so chillingly detailed that even I felt a tremor of fear. It wasn't a bluff, it was a vow. The man holding me started to tremble. His leverage was worthless. He was holding a lit stick of dynamite and the fuse was gone. In that split second of hesitation, everything happened at once. All the lights in the house flashed on, blindingly bright after the darkness. At the same instant, a deafening blast of sound, a high-frequency sonic wave erupted from hidden speakers, so loud and painful it felt like my skull was splitting open. The men screamed, dropping their guns to clutch their ears. In the disorienting chaos of light and sound, a dark shape moved through the doorway. It was Dante. He moved with a speed that wasn't human, a blur of black. He didn't have a gun. In one hand, he held the wicked-looking letter opener from his desk. He went for the younger man first, a silent, brutal takedown that ended with the man slumping to the floor. Then he turned to the one holding me.